Evelyn stood at the iron gates of Ravencrest Castle, her fingers trembling against the cold metal as the invitation burned like acid in her memory. He had invited her to witness his wedding, a perfect theater of vampiric pomp. But what twisted through her chest wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was something far more dangerous, something that made her lift her chin and place her hand deliberately on the shoulder of the young man beside her. The boy's presence made the torches along the castle walls flicker and dance, their flames bowing as if recognizing something ancient in his blood. Adrian had grown tall in the year since she'd last seen these halls, his shoulders broad beneath the simple black coat she'd sewn for him. But it wasn't his height that would stop hearts tonight. It was the way shadows seemed to bend toward him, the way the very air grew heavy with expectation when he breathed. "Are you certain about this?" Adrian's voice carried the weight of centuries, though he had lived barely 18 years. The marks beneath his skin, faint silver lines that traced along his collarbone and down his arms, began to shimmer like embers stirred by wind. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had raised this boy in secret, hidden him away in the cottage beyond the Whispering Woods, where the old guardians had sworn neutrality in all clan affairs. She had taught him to read the ancient texts, to understand the delicate balance of power that governed their world, to control the inheritance that flowed through his veins like liquid starlight. But she had never told him who his father was. She had never spoken the name that would make those marks beneath his skin blaze with recognition. "I am certain of nothing," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that stirred the autumn leaves around their feet. "But I am tired of hiding." The great doors of the castle swung open with a groan that echoed across the courtyard. Music spilled out, strings and flutes weaving melodies that spoke of celebration, of union, of a future written in blood and gold. Evelyn had once danced to such music in these very halls, her silk gown sweeping across marble floors while Darius held her close and whispered promises against her ear. That felt like a lifetime ago. That felt like someone else's memory. Now she wore simple grey wool, her dark hair pinned back with silver combs that had belonged to her grandmother. She carried no jewels, bore no clan colours. She was nobody's bride, nobody's prize, nobody's political advantage. She was simply a woman who had been left behind when ambition weighed more than affection, but the young man at her side changed everything. They crossed the threshold together, and the transformation was immediate. Conversations faltered. Goblets of wine froze halfway to painted lips. The musicians, 3 vampires from the northern courts who had been playing the same ceremonial pieces for 2 centuries, let their instruments fall silent one by one until only the crackle of torchlight filled the vast stone hall. Every eye turned toward them, but it was the marks on Adrian's skin that held their attention. The silver lines pulsed once, twice, then settled into a steady glow that made the ancient vampires in the crowd catch their breath. For those who remembered the old bloodlines, who had witnessed the rise and fall of kings, that pattern meant only one thing. It was the symbol of a lineage destined for the throne. Evelyn felt the weight of their stares, the sharp intake of breath from nobles who had dismissed her years ago. The Dowager Countess Isabel, draped in midnight blue silk, gripped her walking stick so tightly her knuckles went white. Lord Marcus, Darius's cousin and closest advisor, took an involuntary step forward, his eyes never leaving Adrian's face. And there, at the far end of the hall beneath an arch of white roses and silver bells, stood Darius himself. He was magnificent in his wedding attire, a coat of deep burgundy velvet over a white shirt that made his pale skin seem to glow. His dark hair swept back to reveal the sharp angles of his face. But it was his eyes that stopped Evelyn's heart. Those grey eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness now stared at Adrian with a mixture of recognition, wonder, and something that might have been fear. Beside him stood his bride-to-be, Lady Seraphina of the Eastern Territories. She was beautiful in the way that noble vampires always were, ethereal, untouchable, perfect. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of white silk and pearls, her golden hair crowned with a circlet of diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. But her blue eyes, sharp with intelligence and calculation, had already shifted from Evelyn to Adrian and back again, reading the implications with the speed of a born strategist. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Darius stepped forward, his movement breaking the spell that had held the room frozen. "Evelyn!" Her name on his lips was a caress and a question and an accusation all at once. "You came. You invited me." She kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Did you think I would refuse?" His gaze moved to Adrian, and she saw the moment recognition truly hit him. The boy had Darius's eyes, the same storm gray that could shift from gentle to dangerous in the space of a heartbeat. He had the same strong jaw, the same proud bearing that spoke of centuries of noble blood. But there was something else there, something that made the marks beneath his skin pulse brighter. "And who," Darius said carefully, "is this?" Evelyn felt Adrian tense beside her. They had practiced this moment, rehearsed the words that would change everything. But standing here in this hall, filled with the most powerful vampires in the realm, surrounded by the scent of roses and wine and barely contained violence, all their preparation seemed fragile as spider silk. "This is Adrian," she said, and her voice carried clearly through the vast space. "My ward, my student." She paused, meeting Darius's eyes directly. "My greatest joy and deepest sorrow." The words hit their mark. She saw understanding dawn in Darius's face, saw his chest rise and fall with a breath he didn't need. Around them, whispers began to ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. She caught fragments. Impossible. Hidden child. The bloodline. But she kept her eyes on Darius and waited. It was Lady Seraphina who spoke first. "How interesting." Her voice was silk over steel, cultured and controlled. "To bring such a surprise to a wedding celebration. Tell me, child," she addressed Adrian directly, "do you often attend such gatherings?" Adrian straightened his shoulders, and Evelyn felt pride stab through her chest. He had learned his lessons well. "I go where I am needed, my lady. Tonight, I am needed here." The simple words carried such weight that several of the older nobles actually stepped back. There was power in his voice now, the kind of natural authority that couldn't be learned or faked. It was the voice of someone born to command, even if he had spent his life learning to serve. "Needed," Lord Marcus repeated, his tone sharp with suspicion. "And who exactly has need of you?" Evelyn saw the trap in the question, the way it would force Adrian to declare his purpose, his loyalty, his very identity before this crowd of predators. But before she could intervene, Adrian smiled, an expression so like his father's it made her heart ache. "The same one who has always needed me, Lord Marcus, the one who taught me that duty comes before desire, that honor matters more than comfort, and that sometimes the right choice is the hardest one of all." He turned that smile on Evelyn, and she felt tears prick her eyes. "My teacher, my guardian, my mother in all the ways that matter." The words were a declaration of war wrapped in silk. Every person in that room understood the implications. If Adrian was Evelyn's ward, and if those marks under his skin meant what they all suspected they meant, then Darius had fathered a child. The heir he had claimed didn't exist, the bloodline he had said was broken, the future he had abandoned for political alliance. Seraphina's hand moved to the bracelet at her wrist, a delicate chain of silver bells that chimed softly as she lifted it. "How fascinating," she murmured, and those bells seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. "And tell me, Adrian, do you know the significance of those decorations beneath your skin?" Evelyn's breath caught. The silver bells were more than ornament. They were a test, a challenge issued in the old way. If Adrian truly carried royal blood, the marks would respond to their call. If not, the evening would end in his humiliation and possibly his death. But Adrian only tilted his head, listening to the soft chiming as if it were music. And as they watched, the marks along his collar began to pulse in rhythm with the bells, silver light bleeding through his shirt until the pattern was clearly visible to every eye in the hall. The ancient symbol of the throne blazed across his chest like a banner unfurled. The reaction was immediate and electric. Noble vampires who had been merely curious now stared with naked hunger. The Dowager Countess actually gasped, her weathered hand flying to her throat. Lord Marcus took another step forward, his face pale with either excitement or terror. And Darius. Darius looked as if he had been struck by lightning. "Impossible," he breathed. "The bloodline was broken. The curse was sealed. There can be no heir. No heir that you acknowledged," Evelyn said quietly, and the words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "No heir that you claimed. But blood calls to blood, Darius. And some truths cannot be hidden forever." She had planned this moment for months, ever since the wedding invitation had arrived with its elegant script and subtle cruelty. She had known that bringing Adrian here would unleash forces that couldn't be controlled, that it would shatter the careful peace Darius had built with his political marriage. But she had also known that her son, for that was what Adrian had become, in every way that mattered, deserved to know his heritage, deserved to choose his own fate instead of having it chosen for him. The bells on Seraphina's bracelet chimed again, more insistently, and Adrian's marks responded with a pulse of light so bright it cast shadows across the stone walls. There could be no doubt now, no room for denial or dismissal. The boy carried the blood of kings, and every vampire in that hall could see it written in silver fire across his skin. "Well," Seraphina said into the charged silence, her voice admirably steady, "this does complicate things, doesn't it?" Evelyn met her eyes, intelligent blue meeting determined brown, and saw not the fury she had expected, but something far more interesting. Calculation, strategy. The look of a woman who had built her life on adapting to changing circumstances and had no intention of being defeated by them now. "It changes everything," Darius said hoarsely, his grey eyes never leaving Adrian's face. If you are, "I am exactly who I have always been," Adrian said firmly. "Nothing more, nothing less. These marks don't make me a prince, Lord Darius. They simply make me responsible for what I choose to do with the gifts I've been given." It was perfectly said, acknowledging the power without claiming the throne, showing strength without issuing challenge. Evelyn felt another surge of maternal pride, followed immediately by a stab of fear. Adrian was handling himself well, but they were walking through a minefield now. One wrong word, one misplaced gesture, and the fragile balance of power that governed their world could shatter completely. "Gifts," the Dowager Countess said, her voice cracked with age and sharp with interest. "Tell me, boy, what other gifts do you possess? What other surprises have you brought to our celebration?" It was another trap, more subtle than the first. Any display of power would be seen as threat or provocation. Any denial would mark him as weak, unworthy of the blood that flowed in his veins. Evelyn opened her mouth to intervene, but Adrian was already moving. He walked across the marble floor with steady, measured steps until he stood before the ancient vampire. Then, to everyone's shock, he bowed. Not the deep obeisance of a subject, but the respectful acknowledgement of one noble to another. "I possess the gift of learning, Countess," he said as he straightened. "The gift of listening, the gift of remembering that power without wisdom is destruction, and wisdom without compassion is cruelty. Beyond that," he shrugged, a gesture so human and unguarded that it made several of the watching vampires smile despite themselves. "I make excellent bread, I can tune a lute, and I know every constellation visible from the Northern Territories. Useful skills, but hardly world-changing ones." The Dowager Countess stared at him for a long moment, then threw back her head and laughed, a sound like silver bells and wine. "Oh, you are dangerous," she said with obvious delight. "Not for the power you wield, but for the way you choose not to wield it. Your teacher has done her work well. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush with pride and terror in equal measure. The Countess's approval was worth more than gold, but it also painted a target on both their backs. There were others in this room who would not be so easily charmed by Adrian's humility, who would see his very existence as a threat to their carefully constructed world. As if summoned by her thoughts, Lord Marcus stepped forward. His face was carved from granite, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. "All very charming," he said, "but charm does not establish legitimacy. Claims require proof, young man. Bloodlines must be verified. And if you think to use some parlor trick with glowing marks to upset the order of succession..." "Marcus," Darius's voice cut through his cousin's words like a blade through silk. "Enough." The single word carried such authority that even Lord Marcus, who had been questioning royal decisions for 3 centuries, fell silent. Darius walked toward them, each step measured and precise, until he stood close enough to touch. His eyes moved from Evelyn to Adrian and back again, searching their faces for answers to questions he was afraid to ask aloud. "How long?" he said finally. 18 years, Evelyn replied. "Since the night you chose duty over love? Since the morning you announced your betrothal to secure your northern borders? Since the day you decided that what we had built together was worth less than a strategic alliance?" The words hung in the air like accusations, and she saw them hit home. Darius flinched as if she had struck him, his composed mask slipping just enough to show the pain beneath. "I never knew," he said quietly. "You never told me. You never asked." The reply was gentle but implacable. "You made your choice, Darius. I made mine." Around them, the wedding guests watched with the fascination of spectators at a gladiatorial combat. This was better than any entertainment they could have planned. A drama of love and betrayal and long-buried secrets played out before their eyes. Evelyn could feel their hunger for revelation, their thirst for scandal, and it made her skin crawl. But it was Serafina who surprised her. The bride-to-be stepped forward, her silk gown whispering across the marble, and placed herself between Darius and Adrian with the smooth grace of a born diplomat. "Perhaps," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "this is a conversation better suited to a more private setting. The evening is young and there are protocols that should be observed before any decisions are made." It was an elegant way out, a chance for all of them to step back from the precipice before someone said something that couldn't be taken back. Evelyn felt a grudging respect for the other woman's quick thinking, even as she wondered what price such consideration might carry. But Adrian shook his head. "With respect, Lady Serafina, I didn't come here to whisper in corners or hide behind closed doors. I came here because I was invited, and because there are things that need to be said in the light where everyone can hear them." A murmur ran through the crowd. Approval from some quarters, unease from others. The young man had courage, but courage could be another word for foolishness when wielded at the wrong time. "And what exactly needs to be said?" Darius asked, though Evelyn thought she heard the answer in his voice already. Adrian straightened his shoulders and looked his father in the eye. "That I am your son," he said simply. "That my mother raised me with honor and love while you pursued your ambitions. That I bear the marks of our bloodline not as a claim to power, but as a reminder of responsibility. And that I'm here tonight not to steal your bride or shatter your plans, but to ask for the one thing you never gave me, which is recognition." The word fell into the silence like a stone into deep water. "Not as your heir, not as a threat to your carefully balanced world, simply as your son." The request was so reasonable, so human, that it hit harder than any demand for power could have. Around the hall, Evelyn saw faces soften, saw the rigid masks of political calculation crack just enough to show the beating hearts beneath. Even vampires, it seemed, were not immune to the simple desire of a child to be acknowledged by his father. Darius stood frozen, his face a war between duty and longing, between the man he had been and the lord he had become. His grey eyes moved from Adrian's face to the glowing marks beneath his skin, to Evelyn standing proudly beside their son, to Serafina waiting with infinite patience for his decision. The silence stretched until Evelyn thought it might shatter them all. Then the great bells of the castle began to chime midnight, and the procession of candles began. The sound of midnight bells transformed the wedding celebration into something far older and more sacred. As the bronze chimes echoed through the stone halls, every vampire in attendance turned toward the great doors that led to the castle's inner courtyard. The procession of candles was beginning, a ritual that predated kingdoms, that bound their community together with threads of light and tradition that no political marriage could sever. Evelyn felt Adrian tense beside her as servants emerged from the shadows carrying silver candelabras, each one holding 13 white candles that flickered like captured stars. The procession wasn't just ceremony, it was law. Anyone who participated would be bound by its ancient rules, protected by its sacred neutrality, subject to its judgment. Once the candles were lit and the circle formed, no violence could be committed, no challenge issued, no blood spilled until dawn broke the spell. "We should go," she whispered to Adrian, recognizing the trap that yawned before them. If they joined the procession, they would be acknowledging the community's right to judge their claims. If they refused, they would be marking themselves as outsiders, rebels, threats to the very foundation of vampire society. But Adrian was already moving forward, drawn by an instinct older than thought. The marks beneath his skin pulsed in rhythm with the bells, silver light bleeding through his simple black shirt, as if responding to a call only he could hear. Around them, the wedding guests began to follow the candles, their silk gowns and velvet coats creating a river of shadow and moonlight that flowed toward the courtyard. Darius fell into step beside them, his face unreadable in the flickering candlelight. "You understand what this means?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for their ears alone. "I understand that running would make us look guilty," Evelyn replied. "And I understand that my son has never run from anything in his life." She watched Darius's jaw tighten at the word son, saw the way his eyes tracked Adrian's movements with the hungry attention of a man discovering treasure he had never known he possessed. But there was something else there too, fear of what this revelation would cost him, fear of the choices he would be forced to make, fear of the truth that glowed like starfire beneath Adrian's skin. The courtyard had been transformed. Hundreds of candles lined the ancient stone walls, their flames dancing in the autumn wind that carried the scent of dying leaves and coming winter. At the center of the space, a circle of white stones marked the sacred ground where disputes were settled and truths revealed. The wedding guests arranged themselves around the perimeter, creating a living amphitheater of pale faces and glittering jewels. Lady Serafina took her place at the eastern point of the circle, her wedding gown ghostly in the candlelight. Her golden hair gleamed like spun metal beneath her diamond circlet, but her blue eyes were sharp with calculation as they moved from face to face, reading the political currents that swirled through the crowd like invisible storms. The Dowager Countess claimed the southern point, her walking stick planted firmly in the ancient soil as she surveyed the assembly with the authority of someone who had witnessed 3 centuries of such gatherings. Lord Marcus positioned himself at the western point, his granite face carved with disapproval and barely contained outrage. That left the northern point, the place of judgment, the seat of final authority. Darius walked toward it with the measured stride of a man approaching his own execution, each step echoing off the stone walls like a funeral drum. But before he could claim his traditional place, Adrian spoke. "Father." The word rang across the courtyard like a bell, clear and resonant and impossible to ignore. "By your leave, I would ask a boon." Every head turned toward the young man, who stood just outside the circle of stones, his silver marks glowing like constellations against his dark clothing. The formal language marked him as educated in the old ways, trained in the protocols that governed their kind. But the simple courage it took to address a vampire lord before the assembled nobility marked him as something far more dangerous. Darius stopped as if struck by lightning. "Speak," he said, though his voice carried the weight of centuries of reluctance. "I ask for the right to stand witness in my own cause," Adrian said, "to speak truth before this assembly and accept their judgment, whatever it may be." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The request was unusual but not unprecedented. In the old days, disputed heirs had often been allowed to present their own cases, to prove their worth through word and deed, rather than simply the accident of birth. But it had been decades since anyone had invoked that ancient right, and the implications sent whispers skittering through the candle-lit air like autumn leaves. "The boy shows wisdom," the Dowager Countess said, her cracked voice carrying clearly across the stones. "It has been too long since we heard truth spoken without the gilding of political convenience." Lord Marcus's face darkened like storm clouds. Wisdom or arrogance? The young have always been quick to demand what they have not earned, and the old, Seraphina said with silken sweetness, have always been quick to forget that they were young once themselves. Her diplomatic smile never wavered, but there was steel beneath the silk. "I, for one, am curious to hear what truths our unexpected guest has brought us." The exchange crackled with tension, each word a move in a chess game played with lives and loyalties. Evelyn watched from outside the circle, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized how quickly the evening had spiraled beyond her control. She had planned to present Adrian quietly, to let his existence speak for itself. Instead, she had unleashed forces that could reshape their entire world. Darius looked from face to face, reading the currents of opinion that flowed through the assembly like blood through veins. The procession of candles demanded neutrality, but neutrality was a luxury he could not afford, not with his wedding interrupted, his bride calculating, his carefully constructed political alliances trembling on the edge of collapse. "Very well," he said finally. "Let the witness stand." Adrian stepped into the circle of white stones, and the effect was immediate. The candle flames around the courtyard flared higher, their light seeming to bend toward him like flowers following the sun. The marks beneath his skin pulsed once, twice, then settled into a steady glow that made him appear carved from silver and shadow. "I am Adrian of the Whispering Woods," he began, his young voice carrying clearly through the still air. "Ward of Evelyn the Truth Keeper, student of the old laws, keeper of the ancient traditions. I stand before you not to claim a throne or challenge a succession, but to speak truth in a place where truth has become as rare as winter roses." The formal cadence marked him as someone who had been taught well, but there was something else beneath the ritual words, a sincerity that cut through political rhetoric like sunlight through fog. Around the circle, Evelyn saw faces soften despite themselves, drawn by the simple honesty in the young man's voice. 18 years ago, Adrian continued, a choice was made. Love was weighed against duty, desire against necessity, the heart against the crown. The choice was not wrong. A lord must serve his people before himself, must think of generations yet unborn before his own happiness. But choices have consequences, and some consequences cannot be hidden forever. His grey eyes found Darius across the circle, and for a moment the resemblance between them was so strong it stole breath from watching throats. Father and son, separated by pride and politics and the cruel arithmetic of power, connected by blood that called to blood across the candlelit space. I was raised in secret, not from shame, but from love. My mother, his voice caught slightly on the word, my guardian knew that my existence would complicate a world already balanced on the edge of war. She chose exile over confrontation, silence over scandal, years of loneliness over moments of vindication. She chose to protect me from choices I was too young to make, consequences I was too innocent to understand. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes at the simple truth of his words. How many nights had she lain awake, wondering if she had chosen correctly? How many mornings had she watched him practice his letters or tend their small garden and wondered what he might have been if she had stayed to fight for her place at Darius's side? "But I am no longer a child," Adrian said, his voice growing stronger, "and the marks beneath my skin will not be hidden much longer. They grow brighter with each passing moon, more insistent with each beating of my heart. They are not ornaments or decorations. They are responsibility written in silver fire, duty carved into my very bones." He turned slowly, meeting the eyes of each noble around the circle. "I do not come here to steal anyone's throne. I do not come to shatter anyone's plans or upset anyone's carefully balanced world. I come because I was invited, and because there are debts that must be acknowledged, truths that must be spoken, choices that must be made in the light where everyone can see." "Pretty words," Lord Marcus said, his voice sharp with skepticism. "But words are wind, young man. You speak of responsibility and duty as if they were gifts rather than burdens. Tell me, what do you know of the weight of command? What do you know of the cost of keeping a kingdom safe?" Adrian's smile was gentle, understanding, and completely without malice. "I know that my guardian rises before dawn every day to tend the herb gardens that supply healing drafts for 3 villages. I know that she spends her evenings teaching children to read because knowledge is the only inheritance that cannot be stolen. I know that she has turned away marriage proposals from good men because she believed her duty to me was more important than her own happiness." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Around the circle, faces that had been carved with skepticism began to soften with recognition. These were vampires who had lived long enough to understand sacrifice, who had made similar choices in their own long lives. "I know," Adrian continued, "that responsibility is not about wearing crowns or commanding armies. It is about making decisions that serve others before yourself, about bearing burdens that no one else can carry, about standing guard in the darkness so that others can sleep safely in the light." He gestured toward the candles that flickered around them, their flames dancing like living things in the autumn wind. "These candles will burn until dawn, not because they are commanded to, but because it is their nature. They give light and warmth and beauty, and they ask for nothing in return except the chance to serve. That is what leadership should be, not taking what you want, but giving what others need." The Dowager Countess actually smiled, her weathered face creasing with approval. "Spoken like a true philosopher, young one. But philosophy and reality are often uncomfortable bedfellows. Tell me, what would you do if the choice came down to your happiness or your people's safety, your desires or your duty?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "I would choose duty, always, because that is what my guardian taught me, and because that is what these marks demand." He touched his chest where the silver lines pulsed beneath his shirt. "They are not a privilege. They are a promise to serve, to protect, to sacrifice when sacrifice is needed. Even if that sacrifice meant giving up love," Serafina asked, her voice soft but penetrating. "Even if it meant walking away from everything your heart desired for the good of people who might never know or appreciate what you had given up." The question hung in the air like a sword poised to fall. Everyone in the courtyard understood what she was really asking, what choice she was forcing him to face. And in that moment, Evelyn realized that the young woman was not just defending her own position. She was testing Adrian's, measuring his character against the impossible standards that royal blood demanded. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "My lady, love without honor is merely appetite. Desire without duty is simply selfishness. If I cannot be worthy of what I claim to want, then I do not deserve to have it." He paused, his grey eyes serious and infinitely sad. "My guardian taught me that the greatest love is sometimes letting go. If that is what duty demands, then that is what love requires." The words fell into silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of implication through the assembled nobles. Here was a young man who understood the cost of power, who grasped the terrible arithmetic that governed their world. He was not asking for anything. He was simply declaring himself ready to give up everything. Darius stood like a statue at the northern point of the circle, his face carved from marble and shadow. But Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip he maintained on his composure. This was not the confrontation he had expected, not the challenge he had prepared to face. This was something far more dangerous. A mirror held up to his own choices, a question asked in public that demanded an honest answer. "The boy speaks well," Lord Marcus said grudgingly, "but pretty speeches do not prove legitimacy. Blood calls to blood, yes, but blood can also lie. These marks you display, how do we know they are genuine? How do we know this is not some elaborate deception designed to disrupt our carefully maintained peace?" It was a fair question, but it cut like a blade through the careful atmosphere Adrian had built. Around the circle, faces that had been softening with approval grew sharp with renewed suspicion. The political reality reasserted itself like cold water thrown on warm skin. But before Adrian could respond, something unexpected happened. The bracelet on Seraphina's wrist, the delicate silver chain with its tiny bells, began to chime. Soft at first, barely audible above the wind, then growing stronger and more insistent as the silver marks on Adrian's skin pulsed in response. The effect was unmistakable, undeniable. The bells chimed in perfect harmony with the boy's heartbeat, their crystalline notes weaving together in a melody that spoke of ancient oaths and unbreakable bonds. This was not magic that could be faked or simulated. It was the deep recognition of blood calling to blood, of royal heritage acknowledging its own. "Well," the Dowager Countess said into the stunned silence, "I believe that answers Lord Marcus's question rather definitively." But Marcus was not finished. His granite face flushed with anger as he pointed an accusing finger at Evelyn. "You," he snarled, "you orchestrated this. You've had 18 years to plan this moment, to prepare this theater. Do you expect us to believe this is coincidence? That you arrived tonight at this wedding with this boy purely by chance?" Evelyn stepped forward, moving to the edge of the circle where candlelight painted her face in gold and shadow. "I expect you to believe the truth, Marcus. Nothing more, nothing less." "The truth?" His laugh was bitter as winter wind. "The truth is that you were cast aside 18 years ago when Darius chose duty over desire. The truth is that you disappeared into the wilderness rather than face the humiliation of rejection. And now you return with this convenient air, expecting us to overturn years of careful planning for the sake of your wounded pride." The accusations hit like physical blows, and Evelyn felt heat flood her cheeks. But before she could respond, Adrian moved, not toward Marcus, not toward the safety of the circle's edge, but toward the center of the sacred space where judgment was rendered and truth revealed. "Lord Marcus," he said, his young voice carrying surprising authority, "you speak of truth, so let me give you truth. My guardian did not orchestrate anything. She did not plan this revelation, did not scheme for this moment, did not calculate the political advantage of my existence." He gestured toward the assembled nobles, their faces pale and sharp in the candlelight. "If she had wanted to disrupt this wedding, she could have done it years ago. If she had wanted to claim power for herself, she could have presented me as a child when refusal would have been impossible." His grey eyes found Darius across the circle, and the pain there was sharp enough to cut. She kept silent because she was asked to. She disappeared because she was told to. She raised me in exile because she believed that love sometimes means letting go, even when it breaks your heart into pieces too small to mend. The words hung in the air like accusations, and Evelyn saw Darius flinch as if struck. She had never told Adrian about that final conversation, the night when Darius had come to her with duty written in every line of his face and asked her to choose between public scandal and private heartbreak. She had never spoken of the promises made and broken, the vows sworn and abandoned, the future they had planned together that died the night political necessity overruled personal desire. But Adrian had always been clever, always been able to read between the lines and see the truth that adults tried to hide. And now that truth blazed in the candlelit courtyard like silver fire, impossible to deny or dismiss. So yes, Adrian continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, she orchestrated this. She orchestrated 18 years of silence. She orchestrated 18 years of sacrifice. She orchestrated 18 years of putting duty before desire and love before ambition. He turned to face Marcus directly, and the marks beneath his skin flared with sudden brilliance. Tell me, Lord Marcus, what have you orchestrated in service of anyone but yourself? The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet, and Marcus's face darkened with fury. But before he could respond, the great bells of the castle began to chime again. Not the measured tolling of midnight, but the rapid, urgent pealing that announced the beginning of the festival of symbolic bloodshed. The second ritual of the night was beginning, and with it, the rules would change completely. The rapid chiming of the castle bells transformed the courtyard into something electric and dangerous. As the festival of symbolic bloodshed began, servants emerged from the shadows carrying crystal goblets filled with dark wine made from elderberries and blackthorn, their deep purple color so rich it appeared almost black in the candlelight. This was no mere ceremony. It was a binding ritual that would seal whatever truths were spoken, whatever oaths were made, whatever judgments were rendered in the sacred space. Evelyn's breath caught as she watched Adrian accept a goblet from a servant, his young hands steady despite the magnitude of what was unfolding around them. The festival required participation from all present, but it also offered protection. Once the wine was shared, no violence could be committed until the sun touched the eastern towers. But more importantly, no lies could be spoken. The ancient magic woven into the ritual would expose deception like acid poured on silk. "Drink!" the Dowager Countess commanded, raising her own goblet toward the star-swept sky. "Let truth flow like wine, let honesty burn like fire. Let the bonds that tie us be forged anew in silver and shadow." Around the circle, crystal met lips as the assembled nobles participated in a ritual older than kingdoms. The wine tasted of earth and autumn, of secrets buried deep and truths waiting to be born. Evelyn felt it burn down her throat like liquid courage, warming her from within as the magic took hold. Darius drank last, his grey eyes never leaving Adrian's face as the crystal goblet touched his lips. The moment the wine crossed his tongue, something shifted in the air, a subtle change that made the candle flames dance higher and the silver marks beneath Adrian's skin pulse with renewed intensity. "Now," Seraphina said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "let us speak of truth without the luxury of lies." She turned toward Darius, her wedding gown ghostly in the flickering light. "My lord, you stand before this assembly with a choice to make. Will you acknowledge this young man as your son, or will you maintain that he is merely a pretender seeking to disrupt our unity?" The question was brutal in its directness, stripped of diplomatic niceties by the wine that burned in their veins. Under the influence of the festival, Darius could not lie, could not prevaricate, could not hide behind political convenience. He was bound to speak truth, whatever the cost. Darius stood silent for a long moment, his face a battleground between duty and desire, between the man he had been and the lord he had become. When he finally spoke, His voice carried the weight of 18 years of regret. "He is my son." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled nobles. "Born of love I was not strong enough to fight for, raised in exile because I was too much a coward to claim what was mine." His voice broke slightly on the admission. "I knew, God help me. I knew when Evelyn disappeared. Knew when the reports came of a child born in the Whispering Woods. Knew when the Guardians spoke of strange lights, seen dancing through the forest on winter nights." Around the circle, faces that had been carved with skepticism now showed naked surprise. This was not the careful political revelation they had expected. This was raw truth bleeding from a wounded heart. "You knew," Lord Marcus said, his voice thick with betrayal. "All these years you knew, and you said nothing." "I said nothing because I was afraid," Darius continued, the wine-compelling honesty that pride would never have allowed. "Afraid of what it would mean, afraid of the choices I would be forced to make, afraid of admitting that I had chosen duty over love and lost both in the process." Adrian set down his goblet with hands that trembled only slightly. "And now? What choice will you make now, when hiding is no longer possible?" The question hung in the air like a sword poised to fall. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward Darius, waiting for an answer that would reshape their world. But before he could speak, something unexpected happened. The bracelet on Seraphina's wrist began to chime again, its silver bells creating a melody that seemed to echo from the stones themselves. But this time, it wasn't responding to Adrian's presence. It was responding to something else, something that made the young woman's eyes widen with sudden understanding. "The binding," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the supernatural quiet. "The bracelet is reading the binding." She held up her wrist, where the delicate silver chain had begun to glow with the same ethereal light that marked Adrian's skin. But now Evelyn could see that it wasn't just decorative jewelry. It was a ceremonial piece, ancient and powerful, designed to detect the supernatural bonds that tied souls together across time and distance. "What binding?" the Dowager Countess demanded, her cracked voice sharp with interest. Seraphina's blue eyes moved from the glowing bracelet to Darius, then to Evelyn, then back to Adrian. "The soul bond," she said slowly, understanding dawning in her voice. "The connection that forms between true mates, between souls that are meant to be together across lifetimes. I can see it now, threads of silver light connecting the three of you in a pattern I've never seen before." Evelyn felt her world tilt sideways. Soul bonds were rare, sacred things that occurred perhaps once in a century. They couldn't be faked or forced, couldn't be broken by distance or time. They were the deepest magic their kind knew, the foundation upon which eternal love was built. "Impossible," Lord Marcus snarled. "Soul bonds require both parties to accept the connection willingly. They cannot be formed without mutual recognition, mutual choice." "Mutual sacrifice," Seraphina interrupted, her voice soft with wonder. "Look at the pattern, Marcus, really look." She gestured toward the space between Darius and Evelyn, where silver threads were becoming visible in the charged air. "It's not a simple bond between two people. It's a triad, parent, parent and child, connected by love and loss and 18 years of separation." The revelation hit the assembled nobles like a physical blow. Soul bonds were sacred, unbreakable, the stuff of legend and ancient song. To discover one here, in this place, at this moment, was like finding stars fallen to earth. But Adrian was shaking his head, his young face pale with understanding and grief. "No," he said quietly, "you're reading it wrong. The bond isn't between all three of us, it's between them." He gestured toward Darius and Evelyn. "I'm not part of it. I'm what broke it." The words were spoken with such quiet certainty that they cut through the magical atmosphere like a blade through silk. Around the circle, faces that had been lit with wonder now showed confusion and dawning horror. "What do you mean?" Darius asked, taking a step toward his son. Adrian's smile was infinitely sad, infinitely gentle. I mean that soul bonds can be severed, Father. Not easily, not without cost, but it can be done. When a choice is made that violates the foundation of the bond, when duty is chosen over love, when politics triumph over truth, the connection can be broken. He touched his chest where the silver marks pulsed beneath his shirt. These aren't just symbols of royal blood, they're scars. Marks left behind when a soul bond is torn apart, imprinted on the child who was the catalyst for that destruction. The explanation hit Evelyn like a physical blow, stealing breath from her lungs and strength from her knees. She had wondered for 18 years why Adrian's marks were so bright, so insistent, so different from the faded symbols worn by other members of the royal line. Now she understood. They weren't inheritance, they were evidence. Proof of the love that had been sacrificed, the bond that had been severed, the choice that had cost them everything. No, Darius breathed, his face going white as understanding crashed over him. Evelyn, tell me that's not true. Tell me we didn't. Tell me I didn't. But Evelyn could only nod, tears streaming down her face as 18 years of careful denial crumbled like sand. I felt it the night you announced your engagement, she whispered. Like something tearing inside my chest, like a part of my soul being ripped away. I thought it was just heartbreak, just the pain of being replaced. But it was the bond, wasn't it? Breaking apart because we had chosen different paths. The confession hung in the air like a funeral shroud, and around the circle, even the most hardened nobles felt tears prick their eyes. Soul bonds were sacred, precious beyond measure. To discover that one had been destroyed, and destroyed by choice rather than death, was a tragedy that reached into the deepest part of vampire nature. And Adrian, Serafina said softly, bears the evidence of that destruction written on his very skin. Adrian nodded, his young face composed, despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. The marks grow brighter each year because the wound grows deeper. Every anniversary of that choice, every reminder of what was lost, makes them burn a little more. Eventually, they'll consume me entirely, unless the bond is somehow restored. Restored? Lord Marcus leaped on the word like a predator scenting prey. Soul bonds cannot be restored once severed. The magic doesn't work that way. Doesn't it? Adrian asked quietly. Or is it simply that no one has ever been willing to pay the price? The question fell into silence like a stone into still water, and Evelyn felt her heart stop beating as she realized what he was suggesting. Soul bonds could theoretically be restored, but the cost was enormous. Both parties would have to give up everything they had gained since the severing, would have to return to the exact emotional state they had been in when the bond was formed, would have to choose love over everything else with absolute certainty and complete commitment. For Darius, it would mean giving up his political alliances, his carefully constructed power base, the security he had built for his people. For Evelyn, it would mean giving up her independence, her hard-won peace, the life she had built in exile. For both of them, it would mean risking everything on the chance that 18 years of separation hadn't changed them beyond recognition. The wedding, Serafina said suddenly, her voice sharp with understanding. That's why you came tonight, not to disrupt it, but to force the choice. To make it impossible for either of them to continue pretending that duty and love can exist separately. Adrian's smile was gentle but implacable. My guardian taught me that sometimes the greatest kindness is forcing someone to face truth they've been avoiding, and my father taught me, without meaning to, that some prices are too high to pay for power. He stepped into the center of the sacred circle, where judgment was rendered and fate decided. I offer myself as sacrifice, he said formally, his young voice carrying clearly through the candlelit courtyard. Let the soul bond be restored at the cost of my own existence. Let them have back what was lost, and let the marks on my skin serve their final purpose. The offer hit the assembled nobles like a thunderclap. Around the circle, faces went white with shock and horror. Even vampires, accustomed to violence and death, were stunned by the magnitude of what Adrian was proposing. No. Darius's voice cut through the shocked silence like a blade. I will not buy happiness with my son's life. I will not repeat the same mistake that cost me everything 18 years ago. And I, Evelyn said, stepping forward to join Adrian in the center of the circle, will not let him sacrifice himself for choices that were never his to make. She took Adrian's hand in hers, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady pulse of his heart, the love that had sustained them both through 18 years of exile. There is another way, she said quietly. A choice that honors both duty and love, both past and future. She turned toward Serafina, meeting the other woman's intelligent blue eyes with steady determination. Lady Serafina, you are wise and strong and worthy of respect. But you are not soul-bonded to the man you were meant to marry tonight. You are here for politics, for alliance, for the safety of your people, all honorable reasons, but not love. Serafina nodded slowly, understanding flickering in her face. You're proposing a different alliance, a different kind of bond. I'm proposing truth, Evelyn replied. Darius and I are bound by ties that cannot be severed by choice or time or political necessity. But bonds can be shared, can be expanded, can become something larger and stronger than simple romance. She gestured toward the assembled nobles, toward the community that watched them with fascination and fear. What if the alliance you came here to create could be forged differently? What if instead of marriage between houses, we offered partnership between souls, a ruling triad bound by mutual respect, shared purpose, and complementary strengths? The proposal hung in the air like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Around the circle, faces that had been carved with shock began to show dawning possibility. It was unconventional, unprecedented, politically complex, but it was also brilliant. Serafina was quiet for a long moment, her sharp mind working through the implications. A triad, she said slowly. You and Darius bound by soul connection, me and both of you bound by political alliance and mutual respect. It could work if all parties were willing to share power rather than hoard it. More than that, Adrian said, his young voice bright with sudden hope. It could be stronger than traditional marriage because it would be built on choice rather than obligation, on partnership rather than possession. Darius looked from face to face, his son bright with hope, his soulmate steady with determination, his intended bride calculating with sharp intelligence. And what of love? He asked quietly. What of the heart in all this political maneuvering? Evelyn's smile was soft as moonlight on water. Love isn't diminished by sharing, Darius. It's multiplied. The love between us doesn't threaten what you might build with Serafina. It strengthens it, because it proves that bonds can survive anything when they're built on truth. She held out her free hand towards Serafina, an offer of alliance between women who had been positioned as rivals, but who could become something far more powerful together. We've all made sacrifices for duty, all given up pieces of ourselves for the greater good. What if we could have both? What if we could serve our people and follow our hearts without destroying either? Serafina looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then at Darius standing frozen between past and future, then at Adrian, whose silver marks were pulsing with renewed hope. When she reached out to clasp Evelyn's hand, the bracelet on her wrist chimed once, clear and bright as crystal. Then let us forge something new, she said simply. Something stronger than tradition, deeper than politics, more lasting than any bond built on obligation alone. The moment their hands touched, the silver marks on Adrian's skin flared with brilliant light, not the painful burn of a severing bond, but the warm glow of healing magic working its ancient power. Around the circle, the assembled nobles gasped as silver threads became visible in the air, weaving between the four figures in the center of the sacred space. But these weren't the simple golden bonds of soulmates or the political red threads of alliance. These were something entirely new. Silver connections that spoke of choice rather than destiny, of partnership rather than possession, of love that was strong enough to expand rather than jealous enough to exclude. Darius stepped forward, completing the circle as he took Serafina's other hand and reached for Evelyn with desperate fingers. The moment all four were connected, the magic exploded outward like silver lightning, washing over the assembled nobles with warmth and wonder and the absolute certainty that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The soul bond between Darius and Evelyn snapped back into place like a broken bone healing, but it was different now, deeper, stronger, tempered by 18 years of separation and sacrifice. And beside it, new bonds were forming, connections between Serafina and each of them that spoke of respect and partnership, and the possibility of love that grew from choice rather than compulsion. Adrian stood at the center of it all, his silver marks finally dimming as the magical wound that had been bleeding for 18 years began to heal. He was no longer carrying the scars of his parents' broken bond. He was the catalyst for something entirely new. "Well," the Dowager Countess said into the stunned silence, her cracked voice bright with approval, "I believe that settles the question of succession rather neatly." Lord Marcus stepped forward, his granite face softened by wonder. "A ruling triad," he said slowly. "It has precedent in the ancient texts, though none living have seen it practiced. If all parties are willing, we are," Serafina said firmly, her voice carrying clearly through the courtyard. "I came here seeking alliance for my people. I found something far better, partnership with souls I can trust, bonds I can honor, a future I can build rather than simply endure." Darius's voice was rough with emotion when he spoke. 18 years ago, I chose duty over love and lost both. Tonight, I choose truth over convenience and find that I can have everything I thought was impossible. His gray eyes found Evelyn's across their joined hands. "If you'll have me back, if you can forgive the choice that cost us so much." "There's nothing to forgive," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the tears that streamed down her face. "We were young and afraid and doing our best with impossible choices. But we're not young anymore, and we're not afraid. And the choice before us now is possible, if we're brave enough to take it." The festival of symbolic bloodshed was ending as dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with streaks of gold and rose. The candles around the courtyard had burned low, their flames dancing like tiny stars in the growing light. But the magic that had been forged in that sacred circle would last far longer than any ceremony. As the sun touched the eastern towers of Ravencrest Castle, the assembled nobles began to disperse, their faces bright with wonder and possibility. They had come expecting a traditional wedding and witnessed instead the birth of something entirely new, an alliance built on truth rather than convenience, love rather than obligation, choice rather than duty. Adrian walked between his parents and their new partner, his silver marks finally quiet beneath his skin. He was no longer the hidden prince or the unwanted heir. He was simply a young man with a family that had been broken and was now whole, complicated and beautiful and strong enough to face whatever future awaited them. "What happens now?" he asked, as they paused on the castle's great steps, looking out over lands that would be theirs to protect and serve. Serafina smiled, her blue eyes bright with plans and possibilities. "Now we learn, we build. We prove that love and duty don't have to be enemies, that tradition and innovation can strengthen rather than threaten each other." Darius's arm tightened around Evelyn's waist as he reached for their son's shoulder. "Now we do what we should have done 18 years ago. We choose love, and we choose it together." And as the sun rose over Ravencrest Castle, painting the world in gold and hope, The new triad stood together on the threshold of a future that none of them could have imagined alone, but all of them could build together. The marks beneath Adrian's skin had finally stopped burning. The soul bond had been restored and expanded, and love had proven once again that it was stronger than duty, deeper than politics, and more lasting than any bond built on anything less than truth. The castle bells chimed the morning hour, their bronze voices carrying across the land with news of an alliance forged in silver fire and sealed with hearts brave enough to choose love over fear, partnership over possession, and truth over convenience. It was a sound that would echo through the ages, marking the moment when three souls learned that sometimes the greatest courage is not in holding on or letting go, but in choosing to build something entirely new.